Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and let's talk a little bit about The Awakening by Kate Chopin. This is, a piece that, we're looking at the first three chapters today just to sort of go along with a few things and try to understand a few things about it. You've been reading the first three chapters, and you should look at this film once you've read the first three chapters of the book, and you should be in pretty good state to get some more out of it. But essentially, we meet Edna Pontellier, right, in this first chapter. She and her husband are staying at this little resort, right? It sounds like they are staying at these little cottages, seaside cottages, on this island, which is just outside of the mainland of New Orleans, where Mr. Pontellier works, right? So, chapter one, all about just getting to know Edna. She's hanging out with the son of the person who owns the cottages, Robert Lebrun, and it's a sort of getting a feel for the place and the time. What I'd like you to think about, in looking at this chapter, really are things that are maybe a little bit weird, a little bit symbolic, that seem to be being sort of thrown out at you. And looking at this chapter right from the beginning, one of the first characters you're introduced to is this parrot, right? Who's yelling, go away, for heaven's sake, is the allez-vous en sacristie, is what this parrot is yelling, annoying Mr. Pontellier, and maybe setting the mood a little bit, this sense of confinement and getting away might be something that we're looking for, and that the author wanted us to understand about this. So, that being said, chapter one, another thing I want you to sort of notice about this is how Mr. Pontellier is sort of set up to be a very different person than Mrs. Pontellier, Edna, the protagonist of the piece. So keep an eye out for that, and keep an eye out for other things that are sort of going on that seem to be happening at a higher level, right? Apart from the parrot yelling, right? You turn the page onto page 2, and you have additional characters who we'll see once again. The Farival twins show up, these twin girls who play music for us throughout the piece. We have this lady in black sort of walking around, telling her beads, doing her prayers on her beads. That seems like an interesting image to throw there. This lady in black, right? Black symbolizes a whole bunch of things. It sounds like maybe she's in mourning. And so on and so forth. And, look at the way characters are characterized physically. Chopin spends a lot of time focusing on what Edna looks like, what her husband looks like, eyes, facial expressions. That goes right into chapter 2. The first thing we look at is Edna's eyes, right? So, moving forward, we sort of see this sense that Edna hangs out with Robert Lebrun, right, who's significantly younger than her. And you can sort of gauge the ages of these characters from the fact that Edna has two small children, about 5 years old, right? Mr. Pontellier himself is characterized as someone, in his 40s, right? And Mr. Pontellier seems like a very sort of reserved, calm, boring individual, right? And Edna seems like she likes to hang out with a young guy, and it seems like her nature is supposed to be revealed to us as someone who's maybe younger in spirit than her husband, who's already hit the mid-40s, like myself. All right, so there we go. Moving into chapter 3, I mean, we get the sense that this is sort of like a holiday for Edna and her sons, right? But Mr. Pontellier is still working, right? He goes off to the mainland, both to work and to go to the club, right? He sort of hangs out at the club and doesn't know if he's going to be back for dinner, and he tends to leave for the week, send her presents and things like that. So you get the sense that the culture here is the man's working, right? And Edna and the kids are supposed to be vacationing at this little island, right? Chapter 3 was when Mr. Pontellier comes back from Klein's, right? This place a club where people gamble, apparently, because he wins a bit of money. He comes back and he just seems really unimpressed by Edna in chapter 3, right? He comes back and, you know, he's not exactly been the best father figure himself. You know, he promised the boys some stuff and he didn't bring it. But it's almost like he's making up excuses to be upset with Edna. And I think that characterizes the relationship between these two. And I think that's a really important piece of information to move forward with in this, is the fact that Mr. Pontellier expresses disappointment in Edna, right, for not being as motherly as she's supposed to be. Right? He doesn't really judge himself by those same standards. And so that helps us start thinking about sort of that essential question about gender roles, right, and the expectations in a particular time period. You know, this is like the 1890s. So you've got that to work on, and obviously, you know, by the end of chapter 3, we see Edna crying. You know, she's woken up by her husband, who sort of comes up with this story about her son having a fever, which is not the case. I think Mr. Pontellier just wants attention. So we end this with Edna tearfully crying, and just if you just look at page 6 with me here. Third paragraph in. It was then past midnight. The cottages were all dark. A single faint light gleamed out from the hallway of the house. There was no sound abroad except the hooting of an old owl in the top of a water oak, and the everlasting voice of the sea. That was not uplifted at that soft hour. It broke like a mournful lullaby upon the night. Interesting imagery right there. The tears came so fast to Mrs. Pontellier's eyes that the damp sleeve of her peignoir no longer served to dry them. She was holding the back of her chair with one hand. Her loose sleeve had slipped almost to the shoulder of her uplifted arm. Turning, she thrust her face, steaming and wet, into the bend of her arm, and she went on crying there, not caring any longer to dry her face, her eyes, her arms. She could not have told why she was crying. Such experiences are the foregoing were not uncommon in her married life. They seemed never before to have weighed much against the abundance of her husband's kindness and a uniform devotion which had come to be tacit and self-understood. All right? So, you know, we have Edna not really understanding why, but she's terrifically upset, right? And that really sets, you know, the mood of the piece. She doesn't understand why she's getting depressed, right? She seemed, and you know, later on in that chapter, as you go to the end of the chapter, you see that most people consider her husband to be a great husband. Everyone seems to like him. Edna seems to like him. Like it said in that passage just there, she, you know, these little, awkwardnesses between them seem to be pretty common, but don't seem to have a lot of meaning. But maybe they do have a bigger meaning, and that's something to look forward as you continue into the next section of the reading, is to think about this problem of depression that Edna has, right? And what's causing this depression, and how are we going to fix that depression, and how is she going to sort of move on and become a less depressed person? I think that's a great thing to look out for. Anyway, please, continue with the reading. Enjoy this piece. It's a great piece. And remember, as we read, their eyes were watching God. We're also, looking at a female protagonist and a sort of growth that moves forward in both pieces. Okay, thanks for checking in. Bye.